nationally board certified health and wellness coach. I'm a functional medicine academy certified coach. So I have studied over the years, the past, 15 plus years, in all different aspects of functional medicine, bio-individual nutrition, hormone optimization, and a special passion of mine, which is peptide therapy. So that's another lecture down the road. I'll probably come back and do a more specific, for peptide curious people, just to really go through the ins and outs. But peptides tie really well into cellular medicine, which is a passion of mine as well. It's foundational, super important. So I have a clinic here in town. If any of you know Dr. Elizabeth Hudson, she's a urogynecologist. She's fantastic. She's got 2 clinics, one in Reno and one in Sparks. So I see patients at the Reno location, and my counterpart, who you guys have probably met, Kirsten Gregory, she's great. So we work together, and she does the prescribing side of things and does the whole hormone optimization program for the practice and weight loss optimization, and we do that program together. So in trying to come up with a perfect lecture to blend into your guys' group, I brought up bone health, and that can be kind of a boring topic. So I wanted to I have the ability to go really deep into the science, or to keep it more top level. So depending on where you guys are coming in and what your reference point is to, any of you have had osteoporosis or have had scares with bone density changes, and ask me specific questions, because we can go a little bit deeper just to help get some clarity. But in this lecture, what I'd like to accomplish is to describe in more detail what does it really mean as we're aging and the bone starts to break down. What does optimal bone remodeling look like? What are the other cofactors and different health aspects that attribute to osteoporosis or developing osteopenia, which leads to osteoporosis? So I want to talk, a little bit about kind of what the bone is, how it's made, how we break it down, how it stays strong. A small section on a DEXA scan and what actually is a DEXA scan, why are they important, and what are they capturing, right? And a favorite section of mine, which would be 5 lab markers every woman should know to pick up early warning signs of potential bone degradation or bone breakdown, right? I'm really big in my practice on empowering women and men. I work with men as well, but everyone should feel confident in the fact that you're the best health ally that you have, right? Knowing how to interpret your labs, just something as simple as a CBC or a CMP, because let's face it, in conventional medicine, we're not typically getting a deep dive on a full functional medicine lab analysis, but we do have access to a CBC and a CMP, and hopefully vitamin D. If we're lucky, we should be running that at least once a year. So I'm going to talk to you about these different labs and what you guys can become expert at. Looking at something like alkaline phosphatase, probably not even understanding like what even is that. And in this, in the handouts, I actually put like a little cheat sheet, which is a bone health lab interpretation guide. So that's something you guys can take with you, that you can keep for reference. I'm going to hit on just the hidden contributors of bone loss, kind of just some top things to look out for and think about. nutrition that supports bone, and I'll include in that specific supplements, you know, beyond just calcium. We think about calcium and magnesium as these major macro minerals, but what are these other supplements that are really important? Exercise. Obviously this is could not go without speaking about the importance and actually what does this mean? What types of exercise really help build the bone and stress the bone in a beneficial way that makes it stronger. And then I want to weave in a discussion of seed oils, which kind of seems like, how does that even go together with bone density and bone health? But in talking about every aspect of optimized health, we have to know a little about that cell membrane and what that means when we're looking at our food industry and how many potentially rancid seed oils we're getting in our diet, and how that contributes to a breakdown in metabolic health from the cell membrane, that signaling molecule that's so important. And then I also just like 5 pillars of strong bones after 40. So I included that as kind of a summary. So let me start out by just talking about bone. I put some notes on here for your guys, it's like this little outline here, talking about the different types of bone cells, the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts, right? So it doesn't have to be a really deep dive in that, but just know that we have different aspects in the bone as we're stressing it through exercise that is going to attribute to building up of the bone, and also the role of osteoclasts to help break down the bone. So a couple of these things I'm going to read from my notes just so that I can stay on point here. So bone is a living tissue. It's in constant conversation with the rest of the body. It's not just a calcium storage site, it's a structural tissue, it's a mineral reservoir. It mechanically responds as an organ system. It's an endocrine active tissue that reflects whole body physiology. So that connects to the health of our bones, connects to hormones, and as we enter into menopause, insulin resistance, inflammation, stress, membrane health, right? So osteoclast, that's the bone resorbing cells. This is important because if we just had bone building cells, we'd have dysfunctional growth, right? So the osteoclasts break down old and damaged bone. They secrete like proteolytic enzymes that help dissolve excess minerals that are not needed. And it's important because osteoclasts come from, it's one of the reasons that chronic inflammation signaling can encourage too much osteoclastic activity. So too much breakdown comes from inflammatory signals that the body gets. Bone forming cells, these are made primarily, the bone is 50% made from protein. So we always hear, why it's so important to get protein. In terms of our bones, it's not just the minerals, but it's, yes, vitamin D, it's protein, and it's overall adequate energy balance within the body. There's also something called an osteocyte, which I think is an interesting cell within the bone. It's the master sensing cell within the bone. So, osteocytes detect strain, micro damage, and changes in mechanical loading, and then they signal the osteoblast and the osteoclast to do what's next, to keep that bone in balance. The osteocytes are directly correlated to, you know, that master regulator, that when we're loading our bone and exercising, that's what's kind of the overarching guard within the bone. Okay, so I don't want to make it too boring just talking a lot about the bone and how it forms, but just in summary, just to remember that as we have changes in our sex hormones, these steroids help us to regulate the balance and the remodeling of the bone, okay? So this is why we talk about estrogen. Estrogen is one of these signaling hormones that talks to these osteoclasts to help regulate bone production and optimal osteoblast activity to osteoclast. So estrogen's highly involved in that process. I had a whole bunch of notes on like really in-depth stuff about the bone, but in summary, bone formation, protein, minerals, a whole blend of trace minerals, vitamin D, hormone, mechanical loading, the stress the system perceives, okay? So excessive cortisol has a negative impact on the bone. It will break down bone more excessively. Low inflammatory burden, sufficient sleep recovery, adequate energy supply. Okay, so that's what the bone is constantly looking for. So how do we know where we are, right? How many of you guys have had a DEXA scan? Just curious. Yeah, I think in this country, probably in all countries, DEXA scans, really, we should be doing these, you know, at large in conventional medicine much earlier, because we want to catch these changes earlier. Because a DEXA scan, it's actually, it's measuring, it stands for dual energy X-ray absorptometry, okay? This is why everybody just calls it a DEXA scan. So what is it looking at? It's actually measuring bone mineral density. So when you look at a T-score, like if for those of you who had your DEXA scan, right? You've got a T-score, and what it's doing is it's compared to, you know, young adult bone mass, basically. So it's like a comparison of where you are to everyone else in an optimal age range. So, you know, less than -1 is normal. Osteopenia is -1 to -2.5. And osteoporosis is anything greater than -2.5, okay? And so, but what a DEXA scan, it's not necessarily looking at the bone quality, it's looking at the bone density. So it's not looking at the collagen structure, the microarchitecture of the bone, and metabolic health. So there are some new advances that are coming out that I think will be really important, that actually show the quality of that microarchitecture of the bone. Because you guys are probably familiar with things like the bisphosphonates. You know, these are the medications, the prescription drugs that are prescribed if someone does have osteoporosis or osteopenia. The problem with bisphosphonates is that the science does tell us, yes, in some cases they're absolutely necessary depending on how far into osteoporosis you've become, but they don't produce a strong, structurally, you know, rigid, good quality bone. They produce excess bone, but it tends to be fragile bone. It's bone that snaps much easier. So when women start on a bisphosphonate, they are cautioned they cannot do certain types of exercises and certain types of intense loading on the bone because their bones can become very rigid and will snap. So again, the goal is that we want to avoid having to get to that point, right? So all these things that we can do to protect bone density, bone matrix quality, and the microarchitecture and optimal bone turnover. So yeah, and as I mentioned, there is technology that's coming out that's going to be much more advanced, that these newer scans look at this trabecular bone scan. It's called a TBC. So that's just for your guys' own knowledge. It analyzes the texture of the DEXA image and its estimate of bone microarchitecture. So that's, two same people can have the same bone density but very different fracture risk. And that's what we want to avoid. It's the fracture risk, right? I mean, sure, you guys have heard the statistics. Once a woman has like a hip fracture, the incidence of lifespan goes way down. It's like a 5-year life expectancy after that at an elderly age. So on that note, what can we start to do? What can we start to analyze now so that we stay on top of this? And that's what I want to educate you guys on. It's not just about calcium, but what are these important lab markers that you want to look for on your CBC? You guys can go home on your CMP, and you can look for alkaline phosphatase. That's probably going to be the most common one. You guys are going to have access to your protein, your calcium, and your alkaline phosphatase will show up on your labs. I'll talk to you a little bit more in detail, like what each of these does. So vitamin D actually regulates calcium absorption and bone mineralization. So the key is to make sure you have optimized vitamin D. This is always, do I need to supplement? My labs say that I'm fine. I'm at a 30 or a 40. That's marked as completely within reference range. In functional medicine, we look at optimized health ranges, not just general population averages, okay? So that's a big difference. Optimal functional ranges for vitamin D are between 60 and 80. That's really where you want to shoot for your vitamin D. Yes, we get vitamin D from the sun. Cholesterol synthesizes through a reaction through our skin, through the melanocytes in our skin, to help us endogenously produce vitamin D. That is by far the best way to get vitamin D. However, the problem is we don't get the vitamin D synthesized from the sun from the morning all the way. So, it's not like if the sun's out, okay, that counts as sun, that's gonna help activate. It's really that high noon sun. So it's really in Reno, our solar noon. It depends, we just had daylight savings. So it's anywhere from around noon to like 1 or 2 o'clock. Okay, so it's that middle of the day sun that really helps to activate vitamin D. But low vitamin D reduces calcium absorption in the gut, and that triggers compensatory hormonal responses that increase bone resorption. So when our vitamin D is low, it's just one more thing we're gonna have to be worried about. And vitamin D is so much more. I could do a whole hour lecture on just vitamin D, right? It's critical for the immune system. It helps genes that are favorable to turn on and to suppress gene expression that's not so favorable in your genome. So vitamin D is one. Ferritin is another one that just gets overlooked. This is something you can ask your provider to order for you. These are all labs that I just automatically would order for my clients. But ferritin is the iron storage tank marker within the body. So we've got to keep an eye on our iron, but ferritin is actually this aspect of the iron where it's storing and holding the iron in reserve for the body. So optimal functional ranges for ferritin should be between 70 and 100. Low ferritin, because iron plays a really important role in collagen synthesis, in oxygen delivery to the tissues, in mitochondrial energy production, right? So iron's really important, but it's got to be that sweet spot. We don't want to have too much iron, and we don't want to have low iron. We really want to work on having that optimized iron. Functional ranges for ferritin should be about 70 to 100. That's a good range. Low ferritin, problems with connective tissue integrity, collagen connection, impaired bone matrix formation, and fatigue, obviously, and hair regrowth. We need optimal iron to regrow hair. Hair growth is another one that I could do an entire topic on. It's after COVID, I feel like all of us struggle with our hair, and it's just not as dense and thick as it used to be as we age in general too, but all these little nuances really help with hair growth. Magnesium, it's really important for calcium transport. It helps activate vitamin D. It's important for ATP production of energy in the cells. And it's important for osteoblast activity, those bones that help to build up, or those cells that build up the bone. So magnesium deficiency is extremely common. This is why, I can take a poll, and just about every client that comes to see me, they at least know, okay, magnesium is one of these things I've been told that I should take, and it's true. We really need more than we're getting from our diet. Where do we get it from our diet? We're getting it from the soil, from the plants that are pulling the magnesium from the soil. Our soils are depleted. We're not getting even organic produce, unfortunately. You have to eat a lot of leafy greens and a lot of vegetables to get optimal magnesium. One stressful bout, the body uses magnesium so much during stress, it can really drive down magnesium levels as well. So optimal is, above 2.0 nanograms per deciliter. That's another one that you would have to usually ask a provider to keep an eye on. But I think it's important, like if you're deciding do I need more? I'm taking 1 or 2 capsules at night. Is this enough? Or do I really need a little more magnesium spread a couple times throughout the day? Parathyroid hormone, this is one that most of you probably haven't seen or heard of, but it's really important. It actually regulates calcium levels in the bloodstream. If calcium drops or vitamin D is insufficient, the parathyroid hormone increases to restore blood calcium. So optimal ranges are above 60, and elevated parathyroid will indicate vitamin D deficiency, magnesium deficiency, inadequate calcium absorption. So another marker that's really important is something called alkaline phosphatase. This is alkaline phosphatase is produced by the osteoblasts, okay, those cells that are responsible for building bone. Optimal ranges are between 45 and 65. If you are coming in consistently low on your alk phos finding, that's a sign that you potentially have poor bone formation, almost always correlated with zinc and magnesium deficiencies, and protein insufficiencies, okay? And sometimes when I say protein insufficiency, sometimes it's not because you're not eating a lot of protein. It could be that your gut is not able to break down the protein adequately and deliver those essential amino acids into the bloodstream. That's why I really love essential amino acids as a tool just to help you optimize your protein intake. And so on the other hand, high alkaline phosphatase, that could be a sign that there's increased bone turnover, okay? There's inflammation, and the liver is almost invariably involved. And you can usually double check this by looking at your liver enzymes, ALT, AST. Those really should be around 25 or less, anywhere from 15 to 25. If your liver enzymes, they'll get flagged on a CBC and a CMP, they'll get flagged when they start to get too high, when there's, infection with excessive alcohol consumption, with toxin exposure. Those liver enzymes can really get stressed and really high elevation. Protein, I mentioned protein. Yes, you can actually look at your labs and see, like, okay, I'm eating about, Mena said I needed at least 100 grams of protein a day, right? So why is my protein only 6.5 on my labs? You really want to see your protein between 7 and 7.5. That's a really nice number, because low protein, that just means you don't have enough amino acids hitting the bloodstream. Amino acids are critical for collagen formation. By the way, they feed our neurotransmitters. If we've got a chronic stress situation, anxiety, depression, amino acids are the fuel for these important neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. So it goes beyond just, I need this to fuel my muscles for muscle protein synthesis. Protein is a critical nutrient for multiple reasons. Quickly on albumin. Albumin is another really obvious lab marker that everyone can find. It's the most abundant protein circulating in our blood, okay? It acts as a transport system for nutrients and hormones and helps maintain fluid balance. And because bone contains large protein matrix, albumin levels give us insight as to whether or not our body has adequate protein resources to support tissue repair and structural health, right? So albumin, optimal between 4 and 5, really. That's what we're shooting for. Again, you can cross-reference this stuff as you're learning about this, right? Okay, now I know I can look to see my alk phos, I can correlate that with my protein, and I can correlate it with my albumin. So it's a great way to feel empowered. So cholesterol, I brought that into play. Cholesterol is critical for cell membrane, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. But cholesterol is the precursor to all of our sex hormones. It's the precursor to vitamin D, right? So again, that's another hour lecture, but we don't want to drive our cholesterol down too low. In our medical model currently, it's like anything over 201 cholesterol, and you get fearful. It's like heart disease, high cholesterol correlates to heart attacks and strokes. No, it does not. It does not. It's a vital nutrient within the body that is in high demand. The liver produces 80 or more % of the cholesterol that we need to shuttle antioxidants to help the body to remove toxins from the cells. It builds our brain. Our white and gray matter depend on cholesterol. So in addition to the fact that, yes, it is also the precursor to all of our sex hormones. So if our cholesterol is too low, that can be an issue. That can be like a warning sign. It's kind of, you have to say to yourself, like, why is my cholesterol low? I'm eating eggs, I'm eating healthy fats, I'm eating animal meats, or if I'm not eating animal meats, I'm getting dietary fat. So what's going on? Well, there's not a direct correlation with the fats that you eat, and so that's not a direct correlation. It helps give the building blocks, and we need these healthy fats, but that's not the end of the story. There's usually something going on the back end that's impairing cholesterol efflux in the cell membrane, which is how the fats get in and out of the cell membrane, which is really important. Another lab, the last one that I put in there, just the CBC stress, elevated neutrophils, lower lymphocytes. Those are our white blood cells that are really important for immune modulation. Okay, that's what's helping us to keep eye on all of the pathogens that are coming in and clearing them quickly from the body. So in summary, just like the functional patterns of bone loss, nutrient depletion, hormonal stress, right? That can be elevated cortisol for long periods of time, low cholesterol, menstrual irregularities, all that together reduces osteoblast activity. Secondary hyperparathyroidism, like if you, let's just say, for example, if any of you or those that you love and that you know, say, I feel like something's off with my thyroid. Well, most labs are just going to be looking at TSH. Sometimes they'll include T4, which is the inactive thyroid. And then sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll actually look at T3, which is the active thyroid. That's the gas in the gas tank. That's the metabolic furnace that regulates your metabolism, your exposure to heat and cold thermostat, right? So many functions. It's one of the top causes of infertility is when thyroid is off. But just know that parathyroid is another thyroid marker that you can ask for and do a deeper dive that will help you understand what's happening with your calcium and your vitamin D as well. So let me see, I want to make sure I'm not missing anything else on. So I want to kind of lead into this hidden contributors of bone loss, and I've kind of mentioned some of these so far, but the top 10 reasons would be, first one would be chronic underfueling, meaning exercising a lot and consistently, but not providing the body with enough calories and enough protein to fuel IGF-1, which is our growth hormone, right? We need adequate caloric intake to fuel muscle protein synthesis and to also help us with our thyroid and support our hormones, it's really important because that also will lead into cholesterol. So energy deficiencies, there's a term, sometimes it's related, it's called REDS, R-E-D-S, and that stands for relative energy deficiency in sports, and it has a negative impact on osteoblast activity, on collagen synthesis, and then bone resorption cycle. So that's one of the top 10. Chronic stress, elevated cortisol. High cortisol inhibits osteoblast, the bone-producing cell activity. It stimulates actually osteoclasts, okay, that are breaking down. So if the rate of breakdown is higher than the rate of building it up, you're going to have bone breakdown. Chronic stress contributes to impaired collagen formation. Vitamin C is really important. Iron and vitamin C are really important for our skin and for our collagen connective tissue overall. The adrenal gland uses a ton of vitamin C. So it's this like stealing from Peter to pay Paul. these compensatory reactions that happen within the cells that end up leading to, detrimental impact in the end. So chronic stress is definitely one of those things. Low protein intake, we talked about why protein is so important. Collagen synthesis, bone matrix formation, insufficient protein, reduced bone strength, slower bone remodeling and repair, decreased muscle mass. Muscle mass, we're going to talk more about that. That's almost important as anything to help us load our bones, because it gives our body the signal that we need stronger bones. The more muscle we have and the more we're putting pressure on the system, it's like a signal goes out through the hormone system that we need stronger bones. So muscle's really important. Hormone changes around menopause. I kind of touched on that a little bit, but estrogen plays a major role in regulating bone turnover. It helps inhibit those osteoclasts, and it just maintains the balance between formation and resorption. So that's why, bone loss is dramatically accelerated during the first 5 to 10 years post-menopause. That's when most of that is happening in women. Magnesium deficiencies, that's another of the top 10 for all the reasons that we talked about, why magnesium is so important. And then one I'm going to sneak in here, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. I'll spend a couple of minutes on high oxalate diet. And this is something that, working in the nutrition space, studying nutrition as long as I have, it's this kind of double-edged sword, because what I've seen is, after it's like, we all recognize like a Paleolithic type of a diet and lifestyle is super healthy, right? It's a great nutrition foundation. However, there was this switch from, okay, gluten's bad, so I'm not eating gluten anymore, so now I'm gonna have almond flour, right? So almond flour alternatives, almond milk. Can't have cow's milk dairy because it's too inflammatory, and everybody told me I shouldn't be eating milk, or drinking milk products. And so the shift has been that high oxalates in the diet come from things like almonds and spinach, Swiss chard, beet greens. Some of the most nutrient-dense foods contain really high amounts of oxalic acid. Oxalates, what they do is they bind to minerals, and that's what leads to kidney stone formation. Those are actually oxalate crystals. So we'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. I have one little section on oxalates, because I think it's just really important when we talk about bones and just nutrition in general. And not to scare you, because I still want, you still need some of these oxalate foods. You just don't want an overabundance of them. The top 8 reason would be poor sleep and circadian rhythm disruption. Sleep, during deep sleep, that's when our body is producing IGF-1 hormone. That's after you guys have worked out and really stressed the muscles and they've broken down. During deep sleep is the phase of sleep where IGF-1 hormone surges. When IGF-1 hormone surges, that's growth, repair. There's so many beautiful things are happening during deep sleep. So disrupted sleep really can have a negative impact on bone, and as you guys know, on a lot of things. Chronic sleep deprivation, elevations in cortisol, impaired recovery the next day. And you guys who have a Whoop or an Aura ring, you can see like, okay, yeah, when you feel like shit the next day, and you look back at your sleep stats, and you've got like 10 minutes of deep sleep or something. That has a really negative implication on how you feel. The top 9 reason, digestive dysfunction. And because I'm in the functional medicine space, one of the main things that I work on is helping patients with gut conditions, right? So common. Everybody's got some level of like dysbiosis, but the other problem is the prescriptive habit of proton pump inhibitors. You know, it's like anyone who's had a little bit of heartburn or GERD, you happen to have a primary care visit, you're getting prescribed a proton pump inhibitor, a PPI, Nexium, whatever, you know, that you can buy them over the counter at Target. It's like they're so prolific in our society, but what they do is they impact mineral absorption and protein assimilation in the gut because they override and they lower stomach acid, and they create microbiome imbalances, because we need that. There's a reason that our bodies are made with a certain biochemistry. If we're overriding it and tamping down that stomach acid habitually for long periods of time, that is going to impair the stomach acid. Part of its job is when pathogens come in from anything we've eaten, the job is to kill off those pathogens. And we do that in part by the stomach acid being in a perfect balance. So that's what leads to this dysbiotic state. And then subsequently things like SIBO, you know, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is really common, you know, ulcerative colitis, all sorts of things lead from that. So, and the top 10 reason would be insufficient mechanical loading on the bone, which is what you guys are focused on with, you know, your resistance training, impact loading, progressive overload. Walking and cycling are great, but they're not going to stimulate the bone turnover as effectively as these more intense loading exercises will. So, and muscle contraction and skeletal strain provide signals that stimulate the bone. I mentioned that a while ago. That's really important when you think about muscle that way. So, let's see. Put like one little statement just to summarize it. Exercise provides powerful signal for the bone, can only be translated into stronger bones when the body has sufficient nutrients, hormone balance, adequate energy intake, and supportive metabolic environment. That's the key. That's what we're all trying to do, right? So this part of my notes goes back into, but I did just want, in summary and talking about the bone, I kind of mentioned this quickly, but 50% of the bone is made from a protein matrix of collagen. So again, collagen, just little bit, like adding, you know, even a half a scoop of that whole body collagen, that's a really good collagen. It has patented types of collagen called Fortibone and Fortigel. These are specific types of collagen that have been processed in a way that they're small enough that they can actually absorb and get into the collagen matrix. Some of the other ones, like the Vital Proteins collagen that you can get at Costco, it's fine. It's an incomplete protein, because it's not a complete protein. It's an incomplete protein. Doesn't have all 9 essential amino acids. But it's not going to be the therapeutic collagen that you need if you really are working on improving connective tissue, or you've had an injury, or you're worried about your skin. That whole body collagen actually has another one, a third patented form called Verisol, which has been shown. They've done human trials and studies on it. That's why they were able to patent it, because it shows a plumping in the collagen matrix within the skin, underneath the skin. So, okay, so I think that's good on bone. How am I doing? Okay, one more little section on oxalates. So, you know, it's not, again, just like put a note out there to be thinking about it. The main thing that oxalates do is they bind to minerals, calcium, magnesium, and iron. That's part of what they do. They are considered toxic in the body. So small amounts create a hormetic stress, right? That's all good. We know exercise creates a hormetic stress. Small amounts are good. It's just excessive amounts of a high oxalate diet can reduce mineral availability, which then will impact bone, increase the kidney stress on the kidneys, and oxalate toxicity. Not everybody ends up with this, but I have had numerous patients in my practice that we've done gut studies on them, and we see they do not produce oxalobacter, which is an enzyme that's needed to break down oxalates, right? So what do these patients feel? Pain in their joints, pain that almost feels like gout, but it's not gout, because then they go to see the ortho doc, which is my husband, and he draws the fluid and says, no, there's no gout. I've been telling him for years, it's oxalates. He's finally put this all together, but oxalates can act like that in the body because they form crystals, okay? And the crystals are like little shards of glass, and when they build up in the feet and in the joints, they can create excessive pain. That oxalates are what are involved in interstitial cystitis. If anyone's ever heard of that term, it's like a UTI on steroids. I mean, it's so bad. Or vulvodynia, which is like vulvar pain. That again, it's kind of like this mysterious thing. We don't know why she got vulvodynia. Well, yeah, it's this the same patient of mine that had oxalate toxicity. And you can't, if you are kind of suspicious and you just, curiosity has been piqued, you can do a search online. Dr. Sally Norton has done, her whole life's work has been to educate on oxalate toxicity and what happens to patients. But the summary in that is you don't ever want to go from eating a high oxalate diet to just 100% pulling it out, like, oh, I'm not going to eat any of these high oxalate foods anymore, because then you'll end up with something called oxalate dumping, and then you feel way worse because the tissues will start to release that burden, because it's like, oh good, finally more's not coming in, now I can start to get rid of some of this stuff, and you would feel really bad if you did that, so you don't want to do that. Okay, and the last little section of time that I have here, I just want to talk to you about seed oil, cell membrane, bone signaling. What is that tie-in? I'm contracted with the city of Reno. They hired me years ago, and I do their nutrition lectures, and I've done like a full lecture just on the topic of seed oils. I think it kind of fell on deaf ears with most of them, because they looked at me like, what in the heck are you even talking about? The city of Reno employees, some of them, not the greatest health. I mean, they're eating their food mostly from the snack, decanters or whatever you call those at the cafeteria. But the bottom line is that, omega-6s are not the villain. We do need some of this type of fats in the cell membrane. It's that we don't want an overabundance of these inflammatory omega-6s that then bump off the ratio of omega-3s. Omega-3s are these really important EPA, DHA fats, right, that are housed within the cell membrane. All of our cells are a bilipid layer, okay? So that means every single one of our cell membranes is comprised of fatty acids. The DHAs are really important to help stabilize the cell membrane and give it fluidity and help its structure. Because if you've got too much of these inflammatory fats, what you end up with is this kind of rancidity impact on the cell membrane, where it becomes rigid, and then the cell can't send out the nutrients and send out the signals and messages that it needs to transfer all throughout the body to keep your optimized health in check. So one of the tests that I like to run, for my clients is like an omega, it's called an omega check.